Hello, friends, and welcome to another edition of Stay Juicy Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ariana, and today we are going to be having some candid conversations around why you don't want to have sex. So I came up with a list of about 5 things that I see in patients that I'm going to call them libido stealers. And these 5 things, it's not an inclusive list. It's not complete. I'm sure there are a million other things that are on that list. But when I reflect back to the types of conversations that I have with patients every day, I think there's some patterns and there's some things that I see pretty consistently. And I want to share them with you, number 1, so you may or may not feel a little bit more normal. And number 2, I really want to encourage you to take action, especially around your own libido and sexuality, especially as you're entering into this magnificent menopausal journey. And so I know the last few episodes, I've talked about, the education around menopause. And I do think it's important to be educated. I think it's important for you to have knowledge. You can't stay juicy and be stupid. You got to know what's going on in your body with your hormones. And today we're going to be talking about what's going on with your libido and giving you some insight on your sexuality and maybe what's happening, what's not happening so well. Before I get started, I want to tell you a little joke here. One of my favorite series was Insecure, and it was produced and written by Issa Rae. And one of the very first episodes of that series, the girl sang a song at the end, and it was she called the song Broken Pussy. And that always struck with me because just as a gynecologist and talking to women, especially around these sensitive topics, sometimes we just got to figure out what's broken and how we got to fix it. So for those of you who don't know, this is actually what your clitoris really looks like. And it's funny to me because it's broken. Now, normally the clitoris has a head here and 2 legs and 2 arms. And some kind of way in my travels, I broke her, but I kept her because just because she's broken does not mean she don't work. So we're going to be talking about getting her to work right and having all the things. And so we are actually going to have a Stay Juicy conversation. So libido stealers. I'm going to give you all some examples of patients that I see every single day. These women are everyday women from their mid-30s to their 70s and into their 80s. And I have the pleasure of really seeing some of these women actually kind of evolve, especially during this process. Now, I'm going to be sharing some stories. I'm not advocating for any of this. I just sharing what's out there. So at least maybe for some of y'all, it'll be like, okay, good. And for some of y'all, be like, so what? And some of y'all might just get some ideas. And I'm not doing that either. I'm just telling you what's happening out there in these streets. But that said, I'm going to be telling you some stories around these women and their experiences, because I think just by knowing what's happening, and I think the average woman isn't having that conversation with her girlfriend, because some of these conversations can obviously be pretty sensitive and not necessarily even things you want to discuss with even your closest friend. If you have one of those friends that you can discuss it with, that's amazing. But oftentimes we're isolated in our thoughts with these things. And so, it's not even like you can go and talk to your gynecologist or really much of anybody. One woman in particular, I think I'm going to have her on the show. She basically left a marriage of several years, and now she's got at least 4 boyfriends. So this particular patient inspires me, not necessarily because of all the things she's doing, but she inspires me in this idea that she feels liberated enough and in tune enough with her body to know exactly what she wants, when she wants it, how she wants it, and with how many people. And I think for most women, we've never really been allowed to explore that. And if we did do that, then, there were some names and the standards are different, right? A woman who cheats or a woman who has several partners is looked upon very, very differently still than a man who does the same. But I'm here to say that as we go into this new era, I think it's reasonable to begin to think about how you really do want to express yourself sexually and to question some of the narratives that have been spread and that we've lived with. That's what this podcast really is all about too, is changing the narrative, at least having a narrative and conversations that we just don't have. That said, let me get going. Libido stealers. There's 5 of them. Now, these aren't in any particular order because I see this all the time. So I was trying to figure out which one do I see the most, but I don't know. I can't tell. They're all pretty significant. First, libido stealer. I'm going to start with stress. Now you may say, oh yeah, stress. Everybody's got stress. What am I supposed to do? Well, first of all, understand that the biggest and most important sex organ, especially for a woman, is right here. So when I see patients and they tell me, I don't have any libido right now, or I'm just having a difficult time climaxing, or whatever the things are, the first thing I'm going to ask is, honestly, do you like your partner? Now, I know that might seem rude. It may not seem appropriate, but it's very appropriate because at the end of the day, if you don't like the person you're being intimate with, especially for most women, it's not easy. And when there's stress in a relationship, when there's stress in your life, that actually affects you not just mentally, but it actually affects your nervous system. So in order to actually have a sexual experience that's enjoyable and to really get into it, your parasympathetic nervous system has to be more activated than your sympathetic. Now, your parasympathetic is your part of your nervous system that is really more around relaxation and more of the involuntary muscles of our body. And our sympathetic nervous system, I think most of y'all are familiar with that. That's our fight or flight. That's our go, go, go. That's like wake up in the morning, get the kids out to school, get to work on time, do all the things. That's sympathetic. And for most women, unfortunately, you're living in a sympathetic world. And it's really hard to want to have sex and to be able to have that intimacy when you are on overdrive. And what I see over and over again, which is really going to be my last point, but it is about our inability to kind of get out of our head and release that sympathetic drive that's happening. And what are the things that you can do? Now, it may seem corny. It may seem like, oh, I don't know if I have time for that. But honestly, you're at the point with some of these things that you're going to have to make time. You're going to really have to make time with learning how to be present, learning how to be still, learning how to get out of your head and figuring out what that looks like. It's going to look different for everybody. It may look like some strenuous exercise. It may look like some meditation. It may look like reading a trashy novel, like whatever it takes, girl, do what you got to do. But honestly, we got to figure out ways to just calm it back down. Relaxation is what is required for your parasympathetic system to activate. And so as long as you're in sympathetic drive, just know that you are unlikely to have as great of a sexual response that you would want. And that is not just a function of how you're thinking, but it is a function of how your body is working. Libido stealer number 2, vaginal dryness and pain with intercourse is real. And I want to even get beyond the vaginal dryness and pain with intercourse and really just get into that lack of sensitivity. I have so many women that express that, they just don't feel the same. They don't feel themselves the same way. And so actually there are procedures that I do in the office, for lack of a better term, I call them the vaginal rejuvenation treatments. And we use different types of heat energies to change the mucosa of the vagina, and really to help with lubrication and even some stimulation and increasing blood supply and collagen to that area. Because just like men get erectile dysfunction, that erectile dysfunction actually could be a result of just that normal aging process and really the decrease in blood supply to our genitals. And so there are even treatments for men that once we kind of shake out the plaques and increase the blood supply, we can really help them in fixing that erectile dysfunction. With women, the same kind of concept exists. And as we age, we do have less supply to our genital area. And at the end of the day, when you combine that with the vaginal dryness that occurs during this time, the pain with intercourse is just, for a lot of women, they're like, I love my partner. They're great, but it's just not worth it. I just can't do this. And so unfortunately, some women are suffering in silence when there are some easy fixes, in my opinion, to this. And what I will tell you is if you wait too long to fix it, it's no bueno. And it's no bueno because the longer this goes on, the harder it is to really restore that tissue back to its vibrancy. So one of the reasons I like to use the phrase stay juicy is because when we're younger, we're juicier compared to the grapes and juiciness and the succulence and all those things. But as we get older, we lose some of that juiciness. Things are drier, they're more uncomfortable. And at the end of the day, we want to do all the things that are going to bring that vitality back. And one of those ways, simply and honestly, what I think is one of the most effective is vaginal estrogen. Vaginal estrogen, for the most part, is not absorbed systemically. And there are some women that are super, super sensitive. But for the average woman, even a woman that has breast cancer or has been diagnosed and treated can ultimately take vaginal estrogen. Vaginal estrogen, in my opinion, is one of the best and healthiest things that you can do, because as we age, even the vaginal biome changes, right? We have a microbiome in our vagina, just like we have one in our gut. And as we age, that shifts and it changes all the things. And so one of the things that happen as estrogen levels decline is the pH in the vagina actually goes down. And we ultimately want a high pH. And what that requires is having the right kind of balance and amount of bacteria that are naturally there. And when we have an undergrowth or an overgrowth of one or two types of bacteria, then that's going to also cause some problems with sometimes increased risk for vaginal vaginosis, and it can definitely affect vaginal dryness. So that vaginal dryness is a result of us losing the estrogen levels in our tissue that affect the vaginal tissue. The vaginal tissue glands that make glycogen, and basically that's responsible for lubrication. And lubrication is normal. And as you've gotten older, you probably noticed there's less of it, and especially when you are either aroused or wanting to have intimacy or sex. So at the end of the day, when we treat that vaginal dryness, that can obviously affect sensation. It will help with pain. It kind of makes sense that the root cause should be addressed. Now, that said, I'm not saying everybody should be on vaginal estrogen. I'm just saying that it's very effective. And I have seen patients who have waited years, and I mean like over a decade, and then they've finally come in because they just either can't take it anymore or they've found a new partner and they're just like, I'm miserable, I can't do this. And honestly, it takes months in order for us to get that tissue back on track. I'll talk to you on another episode about what those different procedures are. And I'm not saying that anybody needs these procedures per se, but for some women, once things get to a certain point, vaginal estrogen just unfortunately is just not doing all of it. You need more. And so these energy types of therapies can be helpful. You will hear differing opinions about this. It hasn't been in randomized prospective trials, but I can tell you in the hundreds of women that I've seen and had these procedures, there's no question that, and the reason why my motto is saving the world one vagina at a time. They can be remarkable for some people and something to consider. But first and foremost, we're going to treat with estrogen. We're going to pay attention to the fact that our vaginal microbiome is connected to our gut microbiome. And all of these things actually have an influence. Now, your vagina just doesn't like estrogen. It actually likes testosterone too. And what's interesting about it is that the internal vaginal canal likes estrogen, but the vulva, let's get all our anatomy straight, the vulva, which is pretty much everything on the outside, actually likes estrogen, but it also likes testosterone. And that has to do with the way that the organs are formed and all of the things. But testosterone is a little known secret that even in small doses can really make a difference, especially on vaginal tissue. So I usually prescribe a compounded cream. I call it the happy cream because it's probably one of the most popular combination of hormones and hyaluronic acid that patients like. So it's compounded to be placed on the vulva and a little bit in the vagina, but it's a combination of estrogen, testosterone, and hyaluronic acid. When we're talking about everything from the clitoris to the rest of the vulva, and even the vaginal introitus, the entrance, a little bit of testosterone can go a long way in terms of just kind of waking that tissue back up. But for the vagina in particular, she likes estrogen. She, whatever you want to call her, she likes estrogen. She likes testosterone too. But that is something you can talk to your provider about. They shouldn't have any issue in giving you vaginal estrogen. Now, unfortunately, there are going to be some providers out there that don't understand that systemic estrogen does not cause cancer, that we really aren't treating women the same way through menopause, and that estrogen is safe for most patients and very effective for many of those patients too. As a matter of fact, There was a study that just came out on November 6th in the American Journal of Obstetrics and Gynecology. It was entitled Vaginal Estrogen Use in Breast Cancer Survivors, a Systemic Review and Meta-Analysis of Recurrence and Mortality Risk. So those are all fancy words for saying that we looked at all the data out there, and they looked at over 5,522 articles. And at the end of the day, they found that the use of vaginal estrogen in patients with a history of breast cancer was not associated with an increased risk of breast cancer recurrence or any increased risk in breast cancer mortality. So don't take my word for it. There's really data that's hot off the press that is published now in a peer-reviewed journal that is not prospective randomized, but it is a extensive, pretty exhaustive look at what is out there in terms of the literature and what your risk is. So again, don't be afraid of vaginal estrogen. There is no risk for increasing your risk for breast cancer if you had it, and it definitely is not going to give you breast cancer. So if you have a provider who hasn't caught up yet, remember, you need to either make the decision to educate them or find another provider, but don't let anybody stop you from taking some vaginal estrogen because there's really no controversy there. Now, third libido stealer, out of touch partners, but not just out of touch partners, out of touch women. When I do these vaginal rejuvenation treatments, we get a lot of time to talk, and it's an opportunity for me to educate a woman on her anatomy. And oftentimes women are embarrassed, they're confused, and sometimes they're just downright ignorant about what's going on down there. And it is not uncommon that I give a little anatomy lesson and really things that kind of weren't taught. And it's not your fault because at the end of the day, we just figured out what the clitoris looked like, a couple decades ago by MRI. And a lot of doctors just aren't trained in this. But more importantly, nobody really sat you down and really explain how all of this works. And my point around out of touch partners is twofold. One is there are partners that just really don't understand all the plumbing. They don't really understand how all this works. And you can't help them if you don't understand it for yourself. And then there's those out of touch partners that just really don't understand that a woman's sexual arousal curve is very different than a man's, right? It goes back to the sympathetic nervous system and our ability to relax and just get into the moment. Men don't generally have that same requirement. And again, I'm talking in generalities, and I understand there's all versions of all of this, but I'm going to speak in terms of men, women, and intercourse. And honestly, it doesn't matter how we're talking about it, men, women, it's all the same stuff. Like whether you're with a woman, a man, if is painful and you're not sensitive and you're not relaxed, the consequences are the same. One of the things that you probably want to consider as you're going through this phase is recognizing that you are changing, and maybe what you liked 20 years ago is different. And now you want to maybe have those conversations with your partner, and it feels uncomfortable because we're not really given the permission to say, hey, I need you to just kind of do this differently. I'm feeling a little bit different, but ultimately those are the conversations that we need to have. And remembering that we can't expect, again, our partners to understand our bodies better than we do. And how can you do that? I am a fan of exploration. I got to tell you, when I see women and, we're doing these procedures and we start talking about the G-spot and people are like, well, where exactly is that G-spot? Well, let me tell you. Now, legend would have it, and I do say legend because people are just like, I'm not really sure. It could be here, it could be there. It's like, we don't know. But legend would have it that the G-spot is just kind of in one area. And that area would be if you kind of took your finger and what we say called the come hither motion. So you kind of take your finger, put it around your pubic bone and kind of do this come hither motion. And you might be able to detect this one little area that feels a little bit more sensitive. And that's going to vary in women. But I'm here to tell you, ladies, that there is more than a G-spot in there. Like your whole pelvic floor got all kind of stuff going on. And it is not just one little spot that you're looking for. And it's challenging because if you're not in a certain position, if you don't really have that awareness already, then it's almost impossible to find these little I call them secret tunnels, but they're in there. And, full disclosure, I didn't discover some of them till years ago. I was like, I didn't know that was there. One of the tools that I really like to share with women to help with this exploration and understanding that There's more going on in there than just this one little G-spot area that you have to try to find. And it's called the enjoy. The enjoy, it looks very intimidating. I will give you that. Full disclosure, when we sell these, toys in the office, and the rep would come and bring different samples. Obviously, if we liked it, then it would be easier to sell because we could say what it did from our own perspective. When she brought this thing in, I said, you know what? I don't really know. What would you do with this? I was clueless. This was almost a decade ago, actually, and I've come a long way. I let this thing sit in the drawer for a few years because I just really didn't even understand what it could possibly do. And then I decided, what is this thing about? And the reason that I got more interested in it is because as I talked to women, I understood that, a lot of us just really don't understand what's happening and parts of our sexual response and what's responsible for that. So as I started talking to women more about trying to access that G-spot and really exploring, I realized that, I had a void myself that I really probably hadn't filled. And so I pulled this toy back out, and the first few times I was like, I still didn't get it. What it does is actually hit your pelvic floor in areas where I would say no penis has ever gone before. It helps you access areas of your pelvic floor that honestly nothing has ever accessed before. So I can't honestly explain it easily. You're probably listening to this podcast. If you're watching it, you can at least see what this thing looks like. When I show it to patients, they're like, is it a weapon? No, it's not. It actually is, I think, one of the best tools that you can use to start to explore your pelvic floor and really what's going on in there. It will help you access that G-spot, but you will find areas that you didn't even know existed. Now, these are just tools to help you begin to do your own exploration and have the confidence to do that, because oftentimes, we're told, or at least that narrative is that it's, shameful, nasty, or, masturbation. That word just doesn't sink well with a lot of people. But I think for a woman, being able to pleasure herself first and understand exactly what that feels like is very liberating, because then you have a few choices. You can either be very clear with your partner about what and where and how, and for yourself, you can at least know what's really going on down there. I think it's unrealistic to expect your partner to figure out parts of your body that you haven't even discovered for yourself. If that's too intimidating for you, I think at least understanding that your clitoris, for most women, is where most of the action is at, broken or not. Oftentimes I have women come in and they're also feeling like, oh, something's wrong with me. I'm not having a vaginal climax. Understand that 80% of women in general don't experience vaginal climaxes. Now, I used to think that that was fine and dandy and normal and no issue there. But I would say after really exploring that and understanding how you can achieve that, I think most women don't have vaginal climaxes because most women just aren't as in tune with their bodies as they could be. And once you felt exactly what needed to be hit in order for you to do that, then you would, or at least you could. And there's no shame. You can have obviously your clitoral climax or more vaginal, and some people say even up to the cervix. But let's face it, ladies, we're complicated. Well, we just don't know some of these things. But I do know that if you're just able to achieve clitoral climax, you are quite normal. But understand that there's a possibility that you're missing out. And all I'm saying is a little self-exploration could do the trick. Number 4, libido stealer, is fatigue. Now, fatigue kind of goes along with the stress and the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system. But what I want to say around fatigue is this. When you're tired, you don't want to have sex. You don't want to be intimate. You want to go to sleep. That's what you want to do. And you remember those days when maybe you were younger and your partner might, poke you in the back in the middle of the night. You'd be like, yeah, these days, you're going to draw back a nub. Like, don't do that. Do not wake me up. We're tired. If you got kids, if you're working full time, if you're just doing all the things that most women do, kids or no kids, you're tired and you got to get some rest. So don't be too hard on yourself for not having the libido because you're exhausted. So how do you fix that? Well, first and foremost, With that fatigue, sometimes comes a resentment that I'm tired because I'm doing all of these things. And if anybody can hear me up there, you can raise your hands. I know I can't see you, but I know you're out there. And I know a lot of you are resentful because you're doing all the things and your partner is helpful, but you're still doing more of the things than you want to be doing. And so again, that kind of sentiment doesn't help with the fatigue, but the fatigue at the end of the day is a libido killer. Like it's hard. So you're normal. And that's why maybe sometimes if you go on a vacation or if you just take a long weekend, you're more apt to want to have sex because you're not exhausted. So remember that in order to have a libido, it's good to have some energy. And for the average woman, if she's fatigued, she's not going to have a huge libido. The fifth, and what I think is maybe one of the more important libido stealers, I mean, they're all important, but it's really about being in your head. I mentioned earlier that your brain is your largest sex organ, especially for women. I use the analogy that for women, it starts here and then it's here, and then maybe it goes down there. For men, direct opposite. So just understand that when you are in your head, your parasympathetic nervous system can't quite turn on. You're going to be more stressed, feel more fatigue. You got to get out of your head. I had a patient very recently who came in and she was feeling like, she just was not getting that same sensitivity. She wasn't able to climax as fast, which is, again, a quite normal complaint for women as they're going through the perimenopause, menopause. But in her case, as I started talking to her, I realized that she does a lot and she was busy. And I asked her, is it possible that you're kind of in your head a little bit? And again, not to dismiss her complaints in any way and say it's in her head, but the fact that she's in her head. And what does being in your head mean? It's like, okay, what do I have on the schedule tomorrow? Do the kids have everything they need for school? Did I check this? Did I do this email? Did I, what's for dinner tomorrow? Am I cooking? How am I going to get to the store? Like, what about, it's all the things. And if you can't turn that off, you can't have a high libido. It's too much. Something's got to go. So your thoughts are them. True story. I have this conversation with my husband more often than I want to, if I'm honest, because I will go into the bedroom and I'll be like, okay, I'm going to relax. I'm going to get ready. I'm like, yeah, let's do this. I get in the room. I'm like, okay, trying to do a little meditation. I'm trying to just move all the thoughts. Like it's something you got to think about, write it down. Like it'll be there tomorrow. Get out of your head. And if I'm honest, I might have an edible. Whatever I got to do to get out of my head, it's intentional, right? I don't just get out of my head easy. Like we got to escape. So once I escape, and I've told my husband on more than one occasion, like, please, like when you get into the room, please don't talk about work because he works in my office as the accountant. And so he talks to me about the bills and this and that. And I'm like, yeah, no. So we will actually be like, in the bed cuddling. And then he thinks it's a good idea to start talking about that. I'm like, no, you don't understand. I just spent the last 20 minutes trying to get out of my head and stop thinking about these people and all these bills. And now you just put it back in my head. And he just doesn't seem to get it. He does, but he forgets frequently. And it's a libido killer because it's like, because now I'm just irritated because you don't remember that I told you to not talk about those things when you got in the bed. So I don't want to talk about work. I don't want to talk about, the kids or whatever problems they're having right now. I don't want to talk about any of that because for me, it's going to take another 15, 20 minutes at least to get back out of my head so that I can get into my body. For that woman I was talking about earlier, she actually took some edibles prior to intimacy. And when she came back, she was like, I think you're right. It allowed me to relax. Now, again, I'm not saying that, that's the only way to get out of your head and that I'm not even necessarily advising it. I'm just saying that for some people, a small dose of cannabis can help with doing that. But there's meditation, there's taking a walk, whatever you got to do, you got to figure out what works for you to get out of your head. But that is, in my opinion, one of the biggest libido stealers. And if you can figure out a way to get out of your head and into your body, explore your body, understand your body, then this could be a game changer for you. Now, I talked a little bit about the vaginal estrogen and the hormones, but I spoke more around them being used vaginally. Testosterone as a hormone can definitely have an impact on libido. And a lot of women come in the office and that's what they want. They want more energy. They definitely want more libido. And testosterone can be very helpful. It's not for everybody. One of the ways that you can get your testosterone can be just on a cream that's applied. Unfortunately, there's no FDA-approved testosterone for women, so we got to figure out all kind of different ways to get it to you. But a compounded testosterone cream is very popular. A troche, which is a small little, I call them little waxy pills that dissolve under your tongue, is another way you can get your testosterone. And then you can even inject your testosterone intramuscularly. It's not my favorite, but it is something that some of my patients do. And then there are the pellets. Everybody's heard of the pellets. Pellets are not for everybody either. There's definitely not something that I usually start people on, but I do think for some women they work quite well. And yes, you will get some higher testosterone levels, but I've come to the conclusion, and there's no data that I've found out there that the higher testosterone levels necessarily cause a problem. I'm not saying that they don't, but there's just not enough evidence around it. So we don't want these super physiologic levels of testosterone. We want to get back to what could be normal for us. But I dare say that I'm not sure we know exactly what absolute normal is for a woman, because I think as a woman ages, that maybe a little more testosterone might be better for her. I have no scientific evidence for that. It's really just in my experience with patients and how they're feeling when some of these hormones are adjusted. This is where the water gets murky. This is where, there's a divide between, I guess, more of us that are a little more aggressive about treating women around hormone therapy and those that kind of stay in the conventional lane. So conventional medicine, all of our governing bodies really have some very, very clear guidelines on when to use testosterone. Hypoactive arousal disorder is one of the indications for giving a woman testosterone. We always need to look at the entire picture, but understand that every person's going to be different, and some hormones might work great for some people, sometimes absolutely not. There are definitely some downsides, meaning some specific side effects, especially for levels of testosterone that are too high. Testosterone can permanently lower your voice and the quality of your voice. Testosterone can cause hair growth in places that you don't want, and hair loss in places that you want, meaning you can lose hair on top of your head and start growing a full beard. And testosterone, when it's high for some women, can cause some aggression. Like I call it the road rage. So if a woman, for example, comes in and she starts telling me that she's feeling kind of irritable and agitated, I know that it's very possible that her testosterone levels are too high and we have to adjust for that. But in the end, I don't want you to be afraid of exploring not only yourselves, but the hormones that might make a difference in your libido. We're not going to chalk it all up to testosterone. Estrogen, also a decline in estrogen can affect libido. So there are many times when I've treated women with just estradiol alone and their libido has come back. So it is, again, a balance between all of these hormones. It is not a one size fits all. And you're going to want to find a provider who is versed in this topic. I always tell people, especially around testosterone replacement, if you have a provider who starts out with, I have these pellets and this is what I recommend, and they don't talk to you about transdermal estrogen, compounded testosterone, and all the other things, I say go the other direction, because when a provider gives you a pellet, they're going to financially benefit from giving you that pellet. Whereas if we wrote a script for you to go to the pharmacy and get the testosterone, odds are we're not going to get anything for that. So one thing that we've learned in medicine, and in any profession for that matter, is that people can be incentivized to sway your therapy based on what might benefit them. And so I keep pellets an option for patients because women are going to get pellets regardless. And I rather them do it in a safe environment and being able to monitor and just really look at the entire picture, as opposed to just them going to places where they're honestly just giving people pellets and not really looking at the entire picture of what's going on with all of your health. It's important that you don't just have a provider that doesn't give you the entire picture of how your body is working and all of the solutions that you can have beyond pellets. And some of you all may be wondering, well, what about medication? Obviously there are things that help our male counterparts to get all of the plumbing right and get things going. But what is there out there for women? So there are two drugs that are FDA approved that I just want to share with you that have been used to treat women in low libido. In addition to obviously making sure your hormones are optimized. Now, honestly, I don't prescribe a lot of these medications. Number one, they're very expensive. They're just not practical for a lot of women. There are programs that can help you pay for the prescription or sites that you can go to where you can get it much cheaper. But if you just took this script to a regular pharmacy, you'd be paying like some ridiculous amount of money monthly. And, I struggle with the fact that women have to jump through these hoops. But that said, I want to make you aware that these medications actually exist, and there are two of them in particular. One of the medications is called bromelatomide, and the brand name for it is called Vyleesi. Now, this medication is actually a peptide, and that peptide stimulates the melanocortin receptors, and that increases blood supply. And in some ways, you can kind of say it works a little bit like a Viagra. None of these medications are really the equivalent of that and work that way. But think of it, there is an increase in blood supply. One of the side effects that is very common, and it's not, in my opinion, tolerated so great, is nausea and just a little bit of feeling of, I would call dysphoria. They just don't like the way they feel on it. But that said, it also has to be injected, and it's typically injected about 45 minutes before you want to have intimacy with your partner. So there are some barriers there, right? There's the cost barrier. There's the fact that you're injecting yourself. There's the fact that there are fairly significant side effects, in my opinion. And the average patient I've put it on has not decided to continue on it. But it does exist. It's called Vyleesi. Odds are it won't be covered by your insurance, but it is worth looking into if that's something that sounds interesting to you. I know I didn't make it sound very interesting, but it is out there. The other medication is called Addyi or filbanserin. Filbanserin is a generic name. Addyi is the brand name. And Addyi is one of the first medications that's specifically designed for women with hypoactive sexual disorder. And this, again, decrease of arousal. Addyi is a pill that's taken every night. And when it first came out, it was a little challenging because the data showed that, actually wasn't very strong data, but what the data from the research study showed is that you can't really combine this with alcohol. And that's not quite true. And now we've learned that a little bit of alcohol is probably okay. But when it first came out, it was kind of like, and you can't drink with this drug. So that was kind of like, that was like a no for a lot of people. Like, what? I can't have a glass of wine. But now they understand that, some alcohol in moderation could be okay. What I do like about Addyi is that it actually targets serotonin receptors. So it really acts more centrally in the brain. And one of the side effects of Addyi is, I call it, is happiness. So what's not to like? I do have patients that actually really like this medication. There are ways to get the medication, again, getting around the insurance barrier because it's typically not going to be covered by your insurance. So something to consider and to talk to your provider about. Vyleesi, which is injected, or Addyi, which is a pill that you would take nightly, are both ways that you can consider influencing your libido. Again, that said, none of these medications, in my opinion, are something that you really want to consider if you haven't dealt with the other ones, the 5 libido stealers that I mentioned. Also, we can't have this conversation without dealing with the fact that there is a high percentage of women that are still dealing with some form of sexual abuse. And so if you have not done the work around that, obviously that is going to impact just your overall sexual experience. And then there are finally reasons that can make, again, sex so painful, like vaginismus, which I didn't even discuss in the vaginal dryness and pain with intercourse. But vaginismus is essentially a condition where the muscles of the pelvis are just pretty much contracted down. And so on an exam, when we're trying to determine the etiology of a woman's pain during intercourse, one of the things I do is, whether it's a finger or any type of dilator in, if we can get in about 2 to 3 centimeters in, maybe up to 5, what we notice is there's almost like a band of resistance. It's a muscle. There's a muscle that actually encompasses the opening to the vagina. And so when that muscle is tense, that muscle can actually cause pain with intercourse. And so this, again, is not an exhaustive conversation around libido and pain with intercourse. There's a lot more that I plan to talk about in the future, but I just wanted to give you all some ideas of what's out there, what you can do. And I'll leave you with a couple of, again, ideas on what you can do to explore and to understand. One of the tools that I mentioned was the Enjoy. And if you go to tulawellnessmd.com, that's tulawellnessmd.com, go to the store. And if you put in Stay Juicy, you'll be able to get a 10% discount on your Enjoy. I hope that this conversation informed you and you are more inspired and empowered to figure out what's going on with your libido. As usual, always stay beautiful, stay brilliant, but most of all, ladies, keep it juicy. I'm Dr. Ariana, and I will see you on the next one.